One day before my son's wedding, his fiancée whispered in my ear, "Starting tomorrow, you are no longer going to be part of this family. You won't be welcome anymore." Something inside of me broke. Devastated, I decided to stay home. I didn't know that, hours later, their wedding would completely fall apart for a reason no one expected. But before I continue, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love knowing how far our stories travel. Starting tomorrow, you are just old history to this family. That was exactly what my son's fiancée whispered to me on the eve of their wedding, while the other guests conversed animatedly in the background. Her smile didn't falter for a second, but her eyes were ice cold. I was paralyzed. The gift I had brought, a memory album I had spent months preparing, hung from my trembling hands like a dead weight. In that moment, something inside of me snapped. After 2 decades raising my son, Robert, original Gabriel, alone, making every imaginable sacrifice, this woman was telling me with perfect calmness that I no longer had a place in his life. My name is Mary, original Eleanor, and for 25 years I was both mother and father to Robert. When my husband abandoned us, Robert was just 5 years old, still clutching that stuffed dinosaur he wouldn't let go of, even when he slept. I remember the first night alone, when he asked me with those enormous eyes, "Mum, when is Dad coming back?" And I, swallowing my tears, just smiled and said that sometimes people need to go their separate ways. From then on, it was years of waking up at 5 in the morning, original las 5 de la mañana, to get him ready for school before rushing to my first shift at the clinic where I worked as a receptionist. Then I went to my second job at a department store until the evening. Many times I arrived home so exhausted that I could barely take off my shoes before falling asleep. But I always saved energy to hear about his day, to help him with his homework, to be his personal cheerleader at his school's soccer games, original partidos de fútbol. I saved every possible cent. I went without new clothes, cut my own hair, sold the car to pay for college tuition when the scholarships weren't enough. When Robert graduated from law school, I felt like I had fulfilled the silent promise I made to that frightened little boy. He would have every possible opportunity, no matter what I had to sacrifice. So when he introduced me to Diana, original Daniela, 3 years ago, I really tried to like her. She was beautiful, sophisticated, and articulate, everything I never was. She worked at a recognized advertising agency and was always impeccably dressed. Robert seemed enchanted. His eyes lit up when she entered the room, and I only wanted to see him happy. But there was something about Diana that unsettled me from the start. The way her smile would disappear when Robert turned his back. How she spoke to me with that condescending tone, as if she were doing me a huge favor just by addressing me. At family gatherings, she monopolized the attention, talking about international travel and famous clients, rarely showing interest in my life or Robert's childhood stories. "Oh, how sweet," she would say when I mentioned something from the past, as if she were talking to a child. For Robert's 30th, original Trigesimo birthday, I baked the chocolate raspberry cake, original pastel de chocolate con frambuesas. I had made him every year since he was 12. It was our tradition. When I arrived at the party with it, Diana took the platter from my hands with a tight smile. "Robert is following a low-carb diet now, Mary, but thanks for the effort." The cake remained untouched in the kitchen, while Robert, unknowingly, ate the gourmet appetizers, original canapés gourmet she had ordered. I swallowed my wounded pride, as I always did. It's just her way, I thought. She comes from a different world. She doesn't understand our simple traditions. And deep down, I hoped that with time we would grow closer, that she would see me as family. The engagement came quickly, barely a year after they started dating. Robert was radiant, telling me he had proposed to her during a sophisticated dinner at a seaside restaurant. I forced a smile and hugged him tight, telling him how happy I was for him, while fighting a sense of loss I couldn't explain. The wedding preparations completely excluded me. I wasn't called for menu tastings, cake selection, florist visits, or any other decision. When I subtly asked if I could help, Diana replied, "Don't worry about anything, Mary. We've already hired the best professionals. You just need to show up well-dressed on the day." And so it was until the eve of the wedding, when I decided to make one last effort to build a bridge. I prepared an album full of photos and memories of Robert's life, from his first steps to his graduation from law school. Each page told a story of love and perseverance. Every photo carefully chosen to showcase the wonderful man my son had become. I arrived at the rehearsal dinner with the album wrapped in silver gift paper. Diana intercepted me at the entrance, her white rehearsal dress gleaming under the soft lights. "Mary," she said with a superficial smile, "you came?" "Of course I came," I replied, extending the package. "I made this for you too. I thought perhaps you could look through it together tonight, before the big day." It was then that she leaned in, her expensive perfume invading my space, and whispered those words that would mark me forever. "Starting tomorrow, you're just old history to this family. You've done your part. You raised Robert. Now he is my husband, my family. And you are just extra baggage. Don't embarrass us by clinging to him." I stood paralyzed, in disbelief. Before I could respond, she continued, "In fact, perhaps it would be better if you didn't even show up tomorrow. You save us the drama, Mary. It's not like anyone really expects you to be there." I don't remember leaving there. I don't remember driving home. I only remember sitting on the edge of my bed, looking at the teal-blue dress I had bought especially for the wedding, while silent tears streamed down my face. That night, I made a decision I never thought I would make. For the first time in Robert's life, I would not be there for him. I would not show up at the wedding. And that decision, which seemed to be my final surrender, would end up being the catalyst for a devastating truth no one was prepared to face. The wedding morning dawned with a clear blue sky, the kind of perfect day every bride dreams of for her big moment. I woke up before the alarm, years of early morning routine etched into my body like an internal clock. For an instant, I moved automatically. I prepared coffee, took the dress off the hanger, set aside the shoes I had bought specially for the occasion. Simple, yet elegant, the kind a proud mother would wear to her son's wedding. Then Diana's words came back like a punch to the gut. "You are just extra baggage." I sat at the kitchen table, my hands trembling around the coffee cup, while the morning sun drew patterns on the tile floor that I myself had installed years ago when I couldn't afford to hire a professional. My cell phone began to vibrate incessantly, messages from family and friends, all on their way to the church, all asking where I was. I ignored every one of them. After an hour, the first call from Robert came. I let it go to voicemail, unable to hear his voice without falling apart. His voicemail sounded worried, confused. "Mum, where are you? Everyone is waiting for you. Please call me." It was the first time in 25 years, original 25, that I had deliberately disappointed him. The pain was almost physical, as if I were tearing something vital inside of me. But Diana's words had opened a wound that I had been ignoring for too long. For years, I put Robert's needs above my own, stifled my feelings, swallowed veiled insults and condescending treatment, all in the name of love for my son. But that morning, something different stirred within me. A voice that said, You deserve respect too. You deserve dignity too. For the first time, I was choosing myself instead of my son. At 10 in the morning, original, a las once en punto, the doorbell rang. It was my sister Lucy, original, Louisa, still dressed for the wedding, her face a mix of concern and irritation. Mary, what in the world are you doing? Everyone is looking for you. The ceremony starts in an hour. I motioned her to come in, unable to speak, without tears escaping. We sat in the living room, the teal blue dress still hanging on the closet door, like a ghost of what should have been. I'm not going, I finally managed to say. Lucy looked at me as if I had just announced I was moving to Mars. What do you mean you're not going? It's your only son's wedding. Diana told me that after the wedding, I'm no longer part of their family. She told me not to even show up today. My sister paled, indignation replacing confusion on her face. She said that. She looked at you and said that. I nodded, the tears finally winning the battle against my self-control. She said I'm extra baggage, that I did my part, and now I need to exit the scene. Lucy sat down heavily beside me, taking my hands in hers. For a long moment, only the ticking of the wall clock broke the silence. "Oh, Mary," she finally whispered, her voice choked. I always knew there was something off about that girl. She loves him in her own way, I tried to defend. A last spark of hope for Robert's future. No. Lucy shook her head firmly. Love doesn't treat people like that. Love doesn't exclude. Love doesn't humiliate. As we talked, my cell phone kept vibrating with messages and calls. Robert, increasingly desperate, confused friends, Diana's family curiously in complete silence. At 11 o'clock, original, a las once en punto, the church bells began to toll in the distance. I imagined the guests taking their seats, Robert nervous at the altar, Diana getting ready in some side room of the church, probably satisfied with my absence. This should have been the beginning of the end of my story as a central part of Robert's life. A step into the shadows, into the role of a distant figure who would be tolerated on holidays and birthdays, always kept on the sidelines. But fate had other plans. Shortly after noon, when the bells should have been announcing the union of the new couple, my cell phone rang again. It was Lucy, who had returned to the church in Malibu, original Malagana, at my request. Her voice was trembling so much I could barely understand her words. "Mary," she whispered, as if afraid of being overheard. "The wedding didn't happen." My heart stopped. What do you mean it didn't happen? Robert found out. God, Mary, it's terrible. He found out everything about Diana moments before the ceremony. The ground seemed to disappear beneath my feet. He found out that she has been cheating on him with her boss for months. And there is more, much more. Her family is bankrupt, Mary. They needed Robert's money to save themselves. The prenuptial agreement she insisted on so much was a trap to funnel his future earnings into her family's accounts. The world spun around me as the pieces clicked into place. The casual comments about Robert's future salary. Diana's insistence on controlling every financial aspect of the relationship. The way her father, during the engagement, had told me with an enigmatic smile, "Your struggle is over, Mary. Now it's our turn to take care of Robert." It wasn't love. It was never love. It was a carefully orchestrated plan to use my son, to exploit everything he had achieved with so much effort, everything the two of us had achieved together. "How is Robert?" was all I could ask, my voice almost unrecognizable to my own ears. There was a long pause, filled only by Lucy's ragged breathing. "Devastated," she finally replied, "but also determined. You should have seen him, Mary. When he confronted Diana in front of everyone, he was different, as if he had finally woken up from a long sleep. When I hung up the phone, I sat motionless for several minutes, trying to process everything. The wedding that didn't happen, the betrayal, the financial scheme, and in the midst of it all, the absence that should have shattered me, mine, ended up being the only thing that saved me from witnessing my son's public humiliation. Perhaps, I thought with bitter irony, I should thank Diana for driving me away just on this day. The following hours passed in a feverish blur. My phone wouldn't stop ringing, each new tone bringing more details about the disaster that had unfolded at the church. Guests leaving in shock. Diana's family trying to control the damage, making up stories, blaming Robert Chert for abandoning her at the altar. And at the center of the storm, my son, whom I still hadn't managed to speak to directly. Around 3 in the afternoon, original, a lastre de la tarde. A loud knock on the door made me jump. I opened it to find Robert standing there, still wearing his wedding suit, his tie undone and his eyes red. Without saying a word, he came in and hugged me so hard I almost lost my balance. "Mom," he whispered against my hair. "Did you know?" I felt my heart clench. Knew what, son? About Diana, about who she really is. I gently pulled away, looking him in the eyes. I knew she didn't want me around. I knew she didn't respect me. But no, Robert, I didn't know about the betrayal or her family's financial plans. He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. She told you not to go to the wedding, didn't she? That's why you weren't there. I couldn't lie to him. I never could. The night before, she told me that after the wedding, I would no longer be part of your family. She said it was better if I didn't even show up. His face darkened, a new wave of pain and rage washing over his features. And you believed her? You thought I would allow that? That question hit me like lightning. Had I, after all those years of raising him, after knowing his heart better than anyone, really believed that he would allow me to be pushed out of his life? The truth hurt. Yes, I had believed it, not because I didn't trust Robert, but because I had seen the power Diana exerted over him, the way he seemed blind when it came to her. Robert, she turned you into another person when she was around, someone I barely recognized sometimes. He collapsed onto the sofa, covering his face with his hands. I know, he muttered through his fingers. I know. I sat beside him, gently placing my hand on his shoulder. What happened at the church? I want to hear it from you. Robert took a deep breath, as if gathering strength. Robert, original, Roberto, my best man, he received photos of Diana with her boss, Charles, original Carlos. Recent photos from 2 weeks ago. They were, well, it was clear what was happening. He swallowed. Robert showed them to me minutes before the ceremony started. At first, I didn't believe it. I thought it was some misunderstanding or old photos from before we met. But they weren't, I completed softly. No, the date was right there, in the corner of the photos, and she was wearing the bracelet I gave her for our last anniversary. His voice cracked. I confronted her in the ready room. First, she denied everything. Then she said it was just a mistake, a moment of weakness. But then her cousin, Mary Ann, original, Mariana, who was drunk from champagne and nervousness, let slip something about the prenuptial agreement, about how Diana's father had celebrated the night before that their financial problems would be solved after tomorrow. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the betrayal my son had suffered. It wasn't just infidelity. It was an elaborate trap, a web of lies woven by people who were supposed to love him. That's when I realized, Robert continued, his voice gaining firmness, that it was never about me. It was about what I could provide. My future salary, my career, my contacts, all part of a plan. "And what did you do?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. A sad smile crossed his lips. "I walked to the altar, not to get married, but to announce to all the guests that the wedding was cancelled, that Diana had betrayed my trust, and that our relationship was over." I imagined the scene. My son, always so reserved and discreet, standing in front of 200 original 200 guests, exposing his pain and disappointment. The courage that must have taken left me speechless. "Her family went crazy," he continued. "Diana's father threatened me right there, in front of everyone. He said I didn't know who I was messing with. Her mother started yelling that I was humiliating her daughter." He paused, the pain clear in his voice. Diana completely transformed. All that charm, all that sweetness, disappeared. She called me a coward. She said I was overreacting, that everyone cheats, that I was ruining the best thing that had ever happened to me. I took his hand in mine, squeezing it gently. "I'm so sorry, son." He squeezed my hand back, his eyes meeting mine. "You know what hurt the most? It wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't even finding out about the financial scheme. It was realizing that she wanted to push you away from me, that she treated you like something disposable. You, who gave up everything for me, who never, not once, abandoned me." The tears I had been holding back since he arrived finally spilled over. "Oh, Robert. And today, when you weren't there, I was furious at first. I thought you had abandoned me just when I needed you most. But now I understand. She forced you into it. She made you believe that's what I wanted." "I never should have believed her," I admitted, guilt consuming me. "I should have been there for you no matter what she said." Robert shook his head firmly. "No, Mom. Maybe it was better this way. You didn't have to witness that circus. And in a strange way, your absence made me see more clearly. When I realized that you, the most trustworthy, most constant person in my life, weren't there, it was like something clicked inside me. I started questioning everything." A long silence settled between us, filled only by the distant sound of birds in the garden and the occasional chime of my cell phone, which we now ignored completely. "What happens now?" I finally asked. Robert ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he had made since he was a child when thinking deeply. "I'm not sure. I have to deal with the practical stuff, cancelling the honeymoon, returning gifts, and I imagine her family won't give up easily. Diana's father has connections, and apparently he's desperate for money. We'll face it together." "We will," I affirmed, feeling a new determination grow within me. "Whatever it takes." Robert smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen on his face in months. "Together," he nodded, squeezing my hand. That night, while Robert slept in the room I had kept intact for him all these years, I sat on the back porch, looking at the stars. The pain for what my son was going through was real and deep, but there was also, secretly, a small feeling of relief, as if we had narrowly escaped something much worse than a cancelled wedding. Years of manipulation, isolation, financial and emotional abuse. What I didn't know then was that the story was far from over. In fact, the events of that day would only be the prelude to an even bigger battle. A battle that would test not only our resilience, but also our dignity, our truth, and even our financial future. The week following the non-wedding, as I began to call it in my mind, the storm I feared finally arrived. It started as whispers, small shockwaves that spread through our relatively small community. Then, almost overnight, it transformed into a tsunami. Diana's version of events began circulating on social media. An abandoned bride, devastated by an insecure fiancé who succumbed to the manipulations of a possessive mother. She posted a photo of herself in her wedding dress, with artfully smudged makeup, with the caption, "Some people don't know when to step back. Some mothers can't cut the umbilical cord." Comments flooded her page. Strangers offered support. Friends demanded to know what kind of man abandons a woman at the altar and what kind of mother interferes in her adult son's relationship. Her narrative was convincing, emotional, and completely fabricated. "Ignore it," I advised Robert when he showed me the posts, his face pale with rage. "The people who matter know the truth." But we soon discovered it wasn't that simple. Lies have long legs, as my grandmother used to say, and Diana's were running a marathon. I started noticing strange looks at the supermarket, conversations that stopped abruptly when I approached at the pharmacy. An old school friend messaged me asking if I had really ruined Robert's wedding out of jealousy. Even our parish priest, who had known me since Robert was a child, called me in for a private conversation about letting children go their own way. The indignation I felt was quickly replaced by something more painful: shame. Not because I believed the lies, but because after all those years of silent sacrifice, of dignity maintained even in the most difficult circumstances, I was being portrayed as the villain in someone else's story. Robert, meanwhile, was facing his own battles. One of the partners at the law firm where he worked, a casual friend of Diana's father, began questioning his judgment and emotional stability. Clients he had worked so hard to acquire were suddenly reluctant to work with him. Then, on a cloudy Thursday morning, about 10 days, original, dies dies, after the cancelled wedding, the final bomb dropped. An official letter, delivered by a serious-faced courier, addressed to me. I opened the envelope with trembling hands to find a legal notification. Diana's family was suing me for defamation, emotional damages, and, most absurdly, interference with contractual relations. I immediately called my friend Claire, original Clara, who worked as a paralegal at a large law firm in the city. She came straight to my house after her shift, her face grave as she read the document. "This is pure intimidation, Mary," she finally said, placing the papers on the kitchen table. "They are trying to scare you. This interference with contractual relations thing is just a fancy way of saying you ruined their financial plan." "Financial plan?" Claire looked at me in surprise. "Didn't you know? Diana's family is practically bankrupt. Her father lost millions in bad investments over the past few years. They were counting on the wedding to stabilize their finances." That information landed like a stone in my stomach. So it had never been about love, not for a single minute. It was about money, control, financial security. And when I refused to attend the wedding, a small act of self-preservation after years of submission, I gave Diana the perfect opportunity to change the narrative. She couldn't be seen as the unfaithful, opportunistic bride, so she painted me as the bitter, controlling mother who couldn't let go of her son. It was brilliant, in a perverse way. The next day, Robert received a similar letter. He came home pale, tossing the papers onto the table. "They are threatening to sue me too. Diana's father said that if I don't clear her name publicly, he will drag you through the courts. He said he will financially ruin you." My heart raced. Robert had just graduated from law school, was still paying off student loans, and his career was just beginning. A lawsuit, even a frivolous one, could exhaust him before he had a chance to establish himself professionally. "What are you going to do?" I asked, fearing the answer. Robert clenched his fists, a fierce determination in his eyes that reminded me of the child he was. The boy who stood up to bullies twice his size to defend a disabled classmate. "I'm going to fight, Mum. I'm going to fight for both of us." That night, unable to sleep, I remembered something Diana had said months earlier during one of her condescending moments. "You don't understand how the world works, Mary. Perception is everything. People believe what they see, not what is true." She was right about one thing. Perception mattered. People believed her because she played the victim role well. If perception was their weapon, then we needed to fight with the truth, not in whispers, not politely behind the scenes, but openly, publicly. And I had exactly the ammunition we needed. The next day, I rummaged through my small home office, finding every piece of evidence I had almost instinctively kept over the years. Emails Robert had forwarded to me, where Diana talked about her financial expectations for their future. Photos of text messages he had shown me, where she questioned why he insisted on considering original pro bono work, when he could be making real money, original, dinero de verdad. And most importantly, a copy of the prenuptial agreement Robert had asked me to review, with clauses so clearly predatory that any judge would see the intent behind them. When Robert got home from work, I spread everything out on the living room table. "Look," I said, pointing to the papers. "We have our own weapon, the truth." He examined the documents, nodding slowly. "Yes, we have evidence, but how do we use it against them? If we go public, it will just look like retaliation and fuel their narrative that we are vengeful and bitter." I considered his words. He was right. We needed to be strategic. "You're right. We can't just throw this on social media. We need professional help." It was Claire who gave us the answer when we consulted her the next day. "I know an investigative reporter," she said. "Paul Mendez, original Paulo Mendez. He specializes in exposing financial fraud and corporate schemes. If you have concrete evidence, he can turn this into a legitimate news story, not social media gossip." The idea was perfect. An investigative journalism piece would have a credibility that our individual statements would never have. And more importantly, it would shift the focus of the narrative from family drama to financial fraud, where it truly belonged. Paul met us at a discreet cafe in the center of the city. A short man, with a graying beard and penetrating eyes that seemed to examine every word we said. He listened to our story in silence, occasionally taking notes in a small notebook. "What you have is strong," he finally said. "Especially the prenuptial agreement and the original Ramirez family's financial records. But I need more. I need independent confirmation." In the following 2 weeks, Paul worked tirelessly, investigating the financial history of Diana's family, interviewing former employees of their failing companies, even getting an anonymous statement from one of the bank employees dealing with their problematic accounts. Meanwhile, Diana's campaign against us intensified. She gave a tearful interview to a local magazine, detailing how I had poisoned Robert against her for years, how I couldn't accept another woman in his life. Her family started calling Robert's business contacts, insinuating that he was emotionally unstable and unreliable for important legal matters. The pressure was almost unbearable. Robert came home increasingly exhausted, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights. I myself could barely leave the house without feeling the stares, the whispers, the silent judgment of neighbors I had known for decades. Then, exactly 1 month after the cancelled wedding, Paul's report was published. Behind the cancelled wedding, the Ramirez family's financial schemes. The report took up 2 entire pages in the region's most respected newspaper, with an even more detailed online version. It was devastating in its clinical accuracy. It detailed the successive bankruptcies of Mr. Ramirez's companies, the unpaid loans, the previous accusations of fraud that had been quietly settled out of court. It included a legal analysis of the prenuptial agreement, with independent lawyers classifying it as predatory and ethically questionable. And yes, it mentioned the extramarital affair that had been the catalyst for the wedding cancellation. with blurred but recognizable photos of Diana with her boss at an elegant restaurant, clearly in a romantic situation. The reaction was immediate. Online comments flooded in, not against me or Robert, but against Diana and her family. So she wanted his money, not his heart. That poor mother. Imagine being treated like that after raising your son alone. The Ramirezes are gold diggers, plain and simple. The tide had turned. The truth, exposed to the light of day, was doing what our words alone could never achieve. That night, Robert and I sat on the porch of the house, drinking tea in silence. For the first time in weeks, there was no tension in the air, only a shared exhaustion, and perhaps a small thread of hope. "Do you think it's over?" I finally asked. Robert looked at the stars for a long moment before answering. "I don't know. Her family is cornered now, and desperate people do desperate things." He turned to me, his eyes clearer than they had been in months. "But at least now we are fighting with equal weapons, the truth against their lies." I nodded, understanding what he wasn't saying. The battle might not be over, but now we had a real chance of winning. And most importantly, we had each other. The bond Diana had tried so hard to break was stronger than ever. What I didn't know then, as we sat peacefully on the porch that night, was that the Ramirezes still had one last punch planned. A move so audacious, so reckless, that no one could have foreseen it, and that would change our lives forever. The calm that followed the publication of Paul's report was like the eye of a hurricane, a brief moment of peace before the next wave of chaos. For 2 weeks, Robert and I breathed a little easier. The judging stares diminished. Messages of support began to arrive. Even some clients who had distanced themselves from Robert's firm returned, admitting they had been misinformed about the situation. I should have suspected that silence coming from the Ramirez family. People like them don't disappear quietly when exposed. They strike back, usually in ways you could never anticipate. The reprisal came on an ordinary Wednesday, when Robert was in court defending a case and I was grocery shopping at the supermarket. My cell phone rang, an unknown number. I would normally have ignored it, but something made me answer. "Mrs. Mary, original, Eleanor, Oliveira," a formal masculine voice asked. "Yes, this is me. I am Detective Martin, original Martins, from the civil police. We need you to come to the police station as soon as possible to give a statement." My heart froze. A statement about what, exactly? There was a pause, the sound of papers being shuffled. "We have a formal accusation against you for extortion, blackmail, and threats against the Ramirez family." The grocery bag slipped from my hands, oranges rolling down the supermarket aisle. "That's absurd. I never—" "Mrs. Oliveira," the detective interrupted, his voice now softer. "I strongly advise you to come accompanied by an attorney. I left the groceries right there and drove home in a state of shock. My hands were trembling so much I could barely unlock the door. Once inside, I immediately called Robert, who rushed out of court as soon as he heard my shaky voice. When he got home, I had already found the document an officer had left at my door during my absence, an official summons detailing the accusations. According to the complaint, I had threatened the Ramirez family with public exposure of false information unless they paid a significant sum of money, original, dinero, to keep my silence. "This is completely fabricated," Robert said, his face red with rage as he read the document. "They are trying to criminalize the fact that we exposed the truth about them. But how can they just invent accusations like that? Don't they need proof?" Robert ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "To initiate an investigation? Not necessarily. And they probably fabricated some kind of evidence. Fake emails, edited recordings, anything to give the accusation initial credibility. And now? My voice sounded small even to my own ears. Now, Robert said with determination, we fight. And this time, not just for our reputation, but for your freedom. The next morning, we presented ourselves at the police station. Robert had spent the entire night preparing our initial defense, while I sat beside him at the kitchen table, providing every detail I could remember about my interactions with the Ramirez family. The police station was an old, imposing building in the city centre. As we walked up the entrance steps, I noticed a small group of reporters gathering. Someone had leaked information about the accusation to the press. "Don't say anything," Robert murmured, putting a protective arm around me as we hurried past the journalists. Not a word. Detective Martin was a middle-aged man with tired eyes and an unreadable expression. He led us to a small interrogation room, a surreal experience for me, who had never been on the wrong side of the law my entire life. "Mrs. Oliveira," he began after turning on a recorder, "are you aware of the accusations made against you?" "Yes," I replied, surprised by the firmness of my own voice. "And they are completely false." Robert intervened professionally. "Detective, I would like to state for the record that my mother vehemently denies all accusations and that we are prepared to fully cooperate with the investigation, with confidence that the truth will prevail." The interrogation lasted 2 agonizing hours. I was questioned about every interaction I had with Diana and her family, about my motivations for not attending the wedding, about what I really wanted by contributing to the news report that exposed the Ramirezes. I answered every question truthfully, but as the interrogation progressed, I noticed something disturbing in the detective's tone. He seemed to have already formed an opinion, as if he was only following a protocol, not truly investigating. When we finally left, Robert was tense. "He's not being impartial," he muttered as we walked toward the car. "Someone got to him." My stomach sank. "Do you think Diana's family has connections in the police?" "Maybe not directly," Robert replied, "but her father has enough money and influence to open doors, and desperate people don't care about ethics." In the following days, the situation worsened. The story was leaked to all the local newspapers, but in a distorted way. Mother accused of extorting ex-fiancé's family. My name and photo were everywhere. The small beauty salon where I worked part-time politely called me to say that it might be better if I took a leave of absence until everything was resolved. Neighbors who had started greeting me again after Paul's report went back to looking away. The feeling of isolation was overwhelming. One night, sitting at the kitchen table reviewing documents with Robert, I broke down in tears. "Maybe we should just give up," I whispered. "Maybe we should just say what they want to hear, publicly retract." Robert put down the papers and took my hands. "Mum, look at me." His eyes were steady, determined. "That's exactly what they want. To break us, to make us doubt the truth, to make you feel so cornered that you would accept any settlement just to end this. But what if they succeed? What if they arrest me for something I didn't do?" "That's not going to happen," he affirmed with a conviction I desperately wanted to share. "We have the truth on our side, and now we have something else." "What?" A small smile appeared on his face. "Help. Paul, the reporter, is furious about this attempt to criminalize the press. He's investigating Detective Martin, looking for connections to the Ramirezes. And Claire managed to get her boss, one of the biggest criminal defense lawyers in the city, to take our case pro bono. Original pro bono. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. We were not alone in this fight. The following week, the case took an unexpected turn. Paul published a new report, this time focusing on the questionable investigative methods used in the case against me. He had discovered that Detective Martin had a son who worked for one of the few surviving companies of Mr. Ramirez's bankrupt empire. A clear conflict of interest that the detective had conveniently failed to mention. Simultaneously, our new attorney, Dr. Victor, original Vieira, filed a formal petition questioning the validity of the evidence presented against me, demanding that it be subjected to forensic analysis to verify its authenticity. The pressure began to mount, no longer against us, but against the Ramirezes and the system they had tried to manipulate. 3 days after Dr. Victor's petition, we received a call from him, his usually calm voice now charged with emotion. "The prosecution is considering dropping the case," he said. "It seems the evidence won't withstand closer scrutiny, and they don't want the embarrassment of pursuing such an obviously fabricated accusation." Robert and I hugged, crying with relief. But our celebration was interrupted by the rest of Dr. Victor's information. "There's a condition, though. The Ramirezes are proposing a settlement. They will withdraw the criminal charges if you sign a public retraction of Paul's report and agree to a permanent confidentiality agreement on the whole matter." I looked at Robert, feeling rage surge inside me. Even now, cornered, they were still trying to silence us, to force us to deny the truth. "No," I said firmly, surprising even myself with the strength of my conviction. "I will not lie to save their reputation. I will not deny the truth." Robert nodded, a proud smile illuminating his face. "Dr. Victor, our answer is no. Tell them we are prepared to go all the way." It was a risky gamble. We were essentially challenging a desperate, powerful family to do their worst. But something had changed inside me. The fear that had paralyzed me days earlier had been replaced by an iron resolve. I had spent my entire life bending over backward, adjusting, sacrificing my own dignity for the comfort of others. No more. And then, when our challenge was relayed to the Ramirezes, something extraordinary happened. They backed down. 2 weeks later, the case was officially dismissed due to insufficient evidence. Detective Martin was removed from the case due to the conflict of interest. And most surprising of all, Diana and her family left town almost overnight, moving to some distant place where their names and reputations were not tainted by the exposed truth. The storm had finally passed. But as we discovered in the following months, it had left both destruction and growth in its wake. It's strange how life marks us, how certain experiences are imprinted on us, changing not only who we are, but how we see the world around us. In the months that followed the case dismissal, I discovered that truth firsthand. The immediate relief gave way to something more complex, a healing process that was both liberating and painful. Perhaps the hardest thing was accepting that, even with our public vindication, some wounds would never completely heal. Some neighbors remained distant. Certain friendships never fully recovered. Doubt, once planted, is a persistent seed. Robert faced his own challenges. Although his career at the law firm was finally moving forward without the shadow of the false accusations, the emotional trauma of Diana's betrayal left him cautious, reserved. He threw himself into work with an intensity that sometimes worried me, as if he could erase the memories through sheer effort. "You need to give yourself time," I would tell him gently on the nights when I found him still hunched over legal documents at 2 a.m. Original, a las 2 de la mañana, his eyes red with exhaustion. "The pain doesn't disappear if you ignore it." "I'm fine, Mom," he would always reply, with that smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I just have a lot of work." But there were also moments of genuine growth between us. One night, about 6 months after all the commotion, we were sitting on the porch, watching a summer storm approach. The air was heavy with the promise of rain, and distant lightning occasionally lit up the dark sky. "You know what's strange?" Robert suddenly said, breaking our comfortable silence. I look back now and see all the signs I ignored with Diana. The way she talked about money, how she tried to push me away from people who truly cared about me, how she reacted when I mentioned pro bono cases. It's always easier to see the patterns in retrospect, I replied gently. But it's not just that. He turned to me, his eyes serious in the porch's dim light. I wonder why I ignored those signs. Why did I want to believe in her so much that I was willing to sacrifice the things and people who really mattered? That was a question I had asked myself countless times, but had never dared to verbalize. Why had my smart, sensitive son allowed himself to fall so completely under the spell of someone like Diana? I think I was trying to fill something, he continued, the words coming out slowly, as if he were discovering the truth as he spoke. After Dad left, I always felt like there was something broken in me, something that made me insufficient. And Diana seemed so perfect, so complete. I thought that being with her would somehow complete me too. My heart squeezed. All those years, all those sacrifices to shield him from the pain of abandonment, and still, she had found a way in. Robert, you were never insufficient. Never. I know that now, he said, a small, genuine smile appearing on his face. Ironically, thanks to Diana. If she hadn't come in and turned our lives upside down, maybe I never would have confronted that fear. I never would have realized that I am enough exactly as I am. In that moment, as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, I felt a kind of peace settle between us. An understanding that sometimes the most violent storms bring the most necessary changes. For me, the change came more gradually, but it was equally profound. After decades of defining my identity almost exclusively through motherhood and sacrifice, I began to rediscover parts of myself that had been long forgotten. I started painting again, a passion I had given up when Robert was a baby due to lack of time and resources. I started with small watercolors. Then I moved on to larger canvases, letting the colors and shapes express what words sometimes could not. The first time Robert saw one of my finished paintings, he stood in the doorway of the small space I had converted into a makeshift studio, his eyes wide. "Mom, this is incredible. I had no idea you could paint like this." "There are many things about me you don't know," I replied with a playful smile. It was true. There were parts of Mary, the woman, not just Mary, the mother, that were resurfacing after a long sleep. With Claire's encouragement, I also started participating in a support group for women who had gone through trauma or major life transitions. At first, I only went to listen, intimidated by the idea of sharing my story with strangers. But over time, I found my voice. And most importantly, I found a community of women who understood what it meant to be tested to the limit and still remain standing. It was through that group that I met Teresa, original Teresa, a psychologist who specialized in helping people rebuild their lives after abusive relationships. After hearing my story, she made me a surprising proposal. "Mary, have you ever thought about using your experience to help other people? We have a mentorship program for women going through similar situations, and I think you would be an extraordinary mentor." The idea that my pain could have a greater purpose, that it could serve to help others navigate their own storms, ignited something within me. I began training with Teresa, learning the skills needed to support others without emotionally overwhelming myself. 6 months after the end of the case, I gave my first formal talk to a small group of women. My hands were trembling so much that I almost dropped my notes, but when I started speaking, the words flowed naturally. "My name is Mary," I began, "and for most of my life, I believed that love meant erasing yourself, that being strong meant enduring everything in silence. I'm here to tell you I was wrong." The eyes of the women in the room, Some with visible marks of their own suffering, others with more hidden wounds, were fixed on me. An instant connection formed through shared understanding. True strength is not in how much suffering you can silently endure. It's in knowing when to raise your voice, when to set boundaries, when to say, "No, this is not acceptable." And sometimes, true strength is in asking for help when you need it most. As I spoke, I realized I wasn't just helping those women. I was solidifying lessons I myself was still learning. That my dignity mattered as much as anyone else's. That true love never demands you become smaller. That even after the age of 50, original, después de los 50 años, there was still time to discover new parts of myself. Robert came to pick me up after the talk, waiting outside the room with a bouquet of sunflowers, my favorite flowers. When I came out, surrounded by women who wanted to talk more, to share their own stories, I saw the pride in his eyes. "How did it go?" he asked when I finally managed to say goodbye to the group. "Transformative," I replied honestly, feeling a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. For them, and for me. On the way home, we talked about the future, something that, at the height of the crisis with the Ramirezes, seemed like a luxury we might never have again. Robert was considering opening his own law firm, focused on helping people who had been victims of financial fraud. I was thinking about going back to school, maybe taking a counseling course to complement my mentoring work. "You know what the most incredible thing is, Mum," Robert said as we stopped at a traffic light. "A year ago, we were both just surviving. Now we are actually living." His words perfectly captured the transformation we had undergone. The crisis that was supposed to destroy us had instead forced us to grow in ways we never would have imagined. That night, sitting alone in my small makeshift studio, I started a new painting. It wasn't of the storm we had faced, but of the sunrise that came after. Warm colours of hope and renewal spread across the horizon. As the brush glided across the canvas, I reflected on the journey that brought us here, on the cruel words whispered by Diana on the eve of the wedding that never was. "Starting tomorrow, you are just old history to this family." She was right, but not in the way she imagined. The tomorrow she predicted never came. Instead, a different future unfolded, one she could never have anticipated, and one I barely dared to dream of myself. A future where I wasn't just extra baggage in my son's life, but a woman rediscovering her own strength. Where the bond between Robert and me, tested to the limit, emerged not only intact, but stronger and healthier than ever. A future where the scars we carried were not marks of shame, but medals of survival. And as the colours blended on the canvas in front of me, I felt a profound gratitude for this new dawn. Not just for what it was, but for the price we paid to reach it. A price that, however painful it was worth every dollar. Original, centavo. A year has passed since I painted that first sunrise. The canvas now hangs prominently on my living room wall, a daily reminder of how the darkness always yields, eventually, to the light. Time, that master of subtle transformations, did its healing work, not erasing the scars, but integrating them into the broader tapestry of our lives. Robert has thrived in ways that fill my heart with a pride so deep I can barely express it sometimes. He really did open his own law firm, small but growing rapidly, specializing in helping victims of financial fraud and legal manipulation. The work fills him in a way his previous job never did. Seeing him use his own pain as fuel to help others reminds me daily of the extraordinary man he became. "Every case is different," he told me recently during one of our Sunday dinners, now a sacred tradition for us. "But the pattern is always the same. Vulnerable people being exploited by those who should protect them. I see you in every client, Mum, and I remember why I chose this path. As for me, my own journey continued to unfold in surprising directions. The mentoring work expanded. I started giving regular talks at community centres, women's shelters, even at some local universities. My message evolved beyond my own story to address broader issues: the power dynamics in relationships, the signs of emotional manipulation, the importance of preserving your identity even in the closest relationships. And yes, I completed that counselling course. At 53, original, los 53 años, I was a student again, sitting among 20-somethings, absorbing knowledge with a thirst that only life experience can truly awaken. At first, I felt out of place, almost embarrassed to be starting over so late. But I soon discovered that my unique perspective was valued by both professors and younger colleagues. "You lived what we are only studying," a 22-year-old, original 22 años colleague told me, after I shared a bit of my background during a class discussion. That gives the learning a completely different dimension. Painting also remained in my life, a private sanctuary for the days when words aren't enough. My small, makeshift studio expanded to take over the spare room that once held mostly memories and dusty boxes. The walls are now a kaleidoscope of colours and emotions captured on canvas. Some sombre works, exploring the darker corners of my journey. Others, bursting with light and possibility. 6 months ago, to my complete surprise, a small local gallery offered to exhibit some of my work in a collective show about art and healing. Opening night was surreal, watching strangers stand in front of my paintings, finding their own meanings in the colours and forms I poured from my soul. Robert was by my side throughout the opening, a constant and supportive presence. At one point, I realised he had been silent for several minutes, looking at a specific painting, one I had created during the darkest days of our legal case, shades of deep blue and violet, with only a tiny point of golden light on the distant horizon. "That's how it felt, right?" he asked softly, without taking his eyes off the canvas. "Like we were drowning, with only a sliver of hope to cling to." I nodded, struck by his accurate perception. Yes, that's exactly how it felt. He turned to me then, his eyes shining with something that looked a lot like admiration. "You were always stronger than I imagined, Mum. Stronger than you even knew." Those words stayed with me, a balm for the moments when the old insecurities still try to resurface. As for the Ramirezes and Diana, they practically disappeared from our lives. We eventually learned through mutual acquaintances that they moved to another state. Occasionally, some mention of them comes up, someone who ran into them on a business trip, or an old college colleague who stayed in touch with Diana. Whenever that happens, I feel a strange mix of emotions, a distant echo of past pain, but also a kind of reluctant gratitude. It seems contradictory to feel anything but bitterness for people who tried so methodically to destroy us. But the truth is, without that devastating storm, perhaps we never would have discovered the depth of our own resilience. Maybe I would still be living on the sidelines of my own life, defining my worth exclusively through the role of mother. Maybe Robert would still be chasing a version of success that wouldn't truly fulfill him. No, I am not grateful to them. I never could be, but I am grateful for the woman I became by surviving them. About 2 months ago, something unexpected happened. Robert showed up for our Sunday dinner with a guest, Camille, original, Camila, an environmental lawyer he met during a collaborative case. At first, I felt that familiar old anxiety stirring in my chest. Diana's ghosts lurked in the shadows of my mind, ready to remind me how easily I was discarded before. But Camille wasn't Diana. That became clear within the first 5 minutes of conversation. Where Diana talked incessantly about herself, Camille asked questions, genuinely interested in the answers. Where Diana treated me with condescension, Camille treated me with a warm respect that didn't feel forced or calculated. At one point, while I was serving dessert, she noticed one of my smaller paintings hanging in the hallway. "This is simply extraordinary," she said, stepping closer to examine it. "The way you captured that specific light. Did you study formally?" "Not really, I replied, a little self-conscious from the attention. "It's more of a hobby I picked up recently." "Well, you have a genuine gift," she said, and something in the unpretentious sincerity of her tone moved me deeply. "My mother is a curator at a gallery in Boston, Original Belo Horizonte. She would love to see your work." After Camille left, Robert and I did the dishes side by side, a comfortable silence between us until he finally spoke. "So, what did you think of her?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but unable to completely hide the importance of my answer. I considered carefully before responding. "She seems real, present, the kind of person who truly sees others." Robert let out a sigh I hadn't realized he was holding. "Yes, that's exactly what I feel too. Are you serious?" I asked, trying not to press too hard. "We're taking it slow," he replied, a small smile playing on his lips. "We both have our own history of complicated relationships, but yes, I think it could be something special." I felt a lump in my throat, a mixture of hope and that residual fear that might never completely disappear. Robert must have seen something on my face, because he put down the plate he was drying and held my wet hands in his. "Mum, I learned my lesson the hard way. I learned to see the red flags, to value substance over appearance, to never again allow someone to separate me from the people who truly love me." His eyes met mine, steady and clear. "And that includes you. It will always include you." That night, after Robert left, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, looking at the stars. I thought of the young mother I once was, holding a small child who asked when Dad was coming home. I thought of all the nights I spent awake, worried if I was doing enough, giving enough, being enough. If I could go back in time and talk to that younger version of myself, what would I tell her? Maybe that the sacrifices would be worth it, but that she shouldn't lose herself completely in them. That one day, her son would be an extraordinary man, not despite the difficulties they faced, but partly because of them. That there would be pain, yes. So much pain, but also moments of joy so pure that they would make it all worthwhile. And perhaps, most importantly, I would tell her that the story doesn't end with, "and then they lived happily ever after." It ends with, "and then they kept living, growing, learning, sometimes stumbling, but always moving forward, stronger together than they could ever be apart." Last week I received an unexpected invitation. A non-profit organization that works with women transitioning from abusive relationships asked me to be the keynote speaker at their annual fundraising event. The irony was not lost on me. I, who once felt so small, so easily disposable, now invited to share my wisdom with hundreds. I accepted, of course. And as I worked on my speech last night, I found myself returning to those words whispered with such cruelty on the eve of the wedding that never was. "Starting tomorrow, you are just old history to this family." Diana was wrong, but not in the way I initially imagined. I'm not old history. I'm an ongoing story, still unfolding in chapters. No one, not even I, could have foreseen. Looking to the future now, at 54, original, a los 54 años, I see possibilities where I once only saw limitations. I see a son flourishing in his chosen path, perhaps building a new love based on mutual respect and genuine admiration. I see my own work touching lives in ways I never imagined I was capable of. I see new sunrises waiting to be painted, stories waiting to be told, wounds waiting to be transformed into wisdom. And if anyone asks me how I survived the storm that almost destroyed us, I will say this. When cruel words try to define you, when malicious hands try to mold you into something small and disposable, remember who you truly are, not just a mother or a son, or any other singular role the world tries to reduce you to. You are a universe of possibilities. You are a story yet to be written. You are bigger than any definition others try to impose on you. And when someone tries to convince you otherwise, when they whisper that starting tomorrow, you are no longer part of the family, that your worth has run out, that your place at the table no longer exists, remember this. True belonging never depends on someone else's permission. True family is not defined by prenuptial agreements or financial interests. And your story? Well, your story belongs only to you. It was that truth that saved Robert and me in our darkest moment. It was that truth that allowed us to emerge not just as survivors, but as transformed. And it is that truth that I carry with me now, a beacon to light not only my own path, but perhaps also the path of others who are still struggling to find their light. Today, when I look in the mirror, I no longer see just the exhausted single mother who sacrificed everything, nor the woman discarded with cruel words whispered on a summer night. I see Mary, complete, complex, still evolving. A woman who, after spending most of her life taking care of others, finally learned to take care of herself too. And that, perhaps, is the sweetest victory of all. Now, if you liked this story, click on this next video that appears on the screen, because in it, you'll find a story of betrayal and upheaval like you've never seen before.